We're bringing a little taste of the newsroom to the More Profitable podcast today. This is a question I got so many times that we need to discuss it here. We are going to talk about the idea of adding video to your audio podcast, or if you're launching a new podcast, do you have to add video for your podcast to stay relevant, to be successful? That's what we're going to break down today. Welcome to the More Profitable podcast with Stacey Harris. I'm Stacey, and this is the spot to learn more about the strategies, tactics, and tools you need to build your more profitable podcast. My team and I work every day with podcasters like you to shift shows from frustrating time sucks to productive members of your sales team, because your show should be built to generate and convert leads. So let's get into it. Before we even dig in, I'm going to just right up at the top, I'm going to tell you, this is a question I got a ton when I opened up the AMAs, and it's something that I decided to bring here, even though we have moved those to the podcast newsroom, because it's everywhere. I've been having this question all over the place. In fact, we've added video for some of our clients, and we've confirmed that video is not the move for other clients just in this last couple of quarterly strategy cycles with them. So this is a super, super common question. If you've been wrestling with it as well, you are not alone. But this is not the place to get answers to these questions normally. And I know I've been talking about the podcast newsroom and where you can submit questions. And I didn't want to cause confusion by bringing this question here, but we needed to have this conversation on the public side of things, just because of its frequency. So if you want to submit a question like this, or submit a follow-up question to what we're going to talk about today, the best place to find the answers to those questions is generally the podcast newsroom. If you like this show, you'll like that one too. So head on over to podcastnewsroom.com and make sure you've got your feed saved, so that each month on the first and third Monday of the month, you get your new episode of the podcast newsroom delivered right into your favorite podcast player. All right. Again, podcast newsroom is where you can get your feed. And if you want to submit a question, maybe it's a follow-up to what we're talking about today, maybe it's something totally different, head on over to uncommonlymore.com/AMA and leave your question for me. With that, let's get into the question. So again, I've gotten a lot of these questions. There's lots of versions of it. And the thread that I find a little concerning, and this is the conversation I want us to start with. There's this energy of have to in so many of the questions. Do I have to do video? Is video required? Should I be doing video? Video is a bigger lift than an audio-only podcast. It just is. It takes more production. It is more time-consuming to edit. It is more expensive to edit. It is more difficult to edit. Audio gives you a lot of flexibility. There's a lot of things we can do with this. With that said, video offers us a lot of options when it comes to making it something else. If you create something as a video, it can be literally anything else. It can be literally any other kind of content, because I can take the video and turn it into short form video and long form video and medium form video, we'll call it. I can rip the audio and turn it into podcasts and audiograms. I can take the transcript and turn it into blog posts and social media posts. I can create anything if I have video first. That doesn't mean it's not more difficult to create all of those things. It doesn't mean that the video is not going to take more capacity, more effort, and more money to get done. It's just the way it is. You're adding another element. And so I want you to shift out of this idea, this fallacy, that it's a requirement, that it is the only way to go. You'll notice that this is not a video podcast, because right now, it's just not what I want to put my energy behind. I would rather be doing this and the private podcast than be doing this as the video podcast. And that genuinely is what it comes down to, is where can I have X amount of capacity. Everything I do to chip out of that leaves me with less. And so if I shifted this podcast to a video podcast, I would not still have the capacity to do additional podcast content with a private podcast. I just wouldn't. And so you've got to be looking at what is your capacity? What is possible in your world right now? Again, this might not have video right now. That doesn't mean it won't ever. It doesn't mean that it's a bad idea. It doesn't mean that it won't work here. It just means that it is not the right fit for me right now. And when you separate from the idea that this is required, when you separate from the idea of shoulds and have-tos, and you start evaluating what is the best use of my time, capacity, and money, then you can make the decision. And make the decision that's right for you right now. It doesn't mean it's an unchangeable answer. It doesn't shift. I had a video show. So for a long time, not in this current iteration, but for a long time, there was a weekly video that went up on YouTube. It was not a video version of this podcast. I had this podcast that happened weekly, and I want to say it was for like 2 or 3 years. We also did a weekly video. In that season of my life in business, in that season of my offer, in that season of my business model, that made absolute sense and worked really well for me. That's not the season I'm in my life or my business. And so now I'm making different decisions. That may change next year. That may change next quarter. But I want to invite you to look at what's right for you right now. It doesn't have to be what's right for somebody else, and it doesn't have to be what's right forever. It just has to be what's right for you right now. Let's help you make this decision by talking through some of the pros and cons. Because I think that when we stay in this conversation of have to, should to, must do kind of things, we neglect to include the fact that there are cons to everything. There's gives and there's takes, right? And so I want us to look at what are the pros and the cons to each. What are the pros and cons to video content? First pro is something we've already touched on, which is the repurposability. We talked about repurposing in the last few weeks. You can do anything with video, and that's really nice. I can turn it into anything. It is the only thing I can't create from any of the other elements, right? It is the only thing I can't make happen is you on video. I can produce a video, but I can't produce you on video. Although AI is working on changing this. But I can't produce a high quality version of you on video without you on video. So first and foremost, the reusability, the ability to repurpose, there's nothing like it with video. 2, increased visibility and reach. We all know what the reach of something like YouTube is, right? It's a whole nother layer of discoverability. It's a whole nother layer of reach. And there is a whole built-in audience on a platform like YouTube, on a platform like TikTok, where they're eager for video. It is what they're consuming. It's what they're ready to consume. It's what they want to consume. Another pro, SEO. It's you putting your show on another platform that, frankly, Google loves because Google owns. So SEO, hugely beneficial. The last piece I want to talk about is visual branding. Like it is. I get to see you. I get to see your environment. I get to see what you're talking about in some cases, depending on the show topic. But there is a connection and an engagement point I get because of that visual brand, because I get to see you. When I'm seeing you in this environment, it makes it easy for me to recognize you when it comes up again and when I'm seeing other videos. And so it is another really incredible connection point. However, there are also cons, right? So again, another one we've already talked about, increased production cost. Like it is more difficult to produce video than it is to produce audio only. The edits are more complicated. What we can edit gets a little more difficult. What we need to do to edit something cleanly with video versus audio is different. There's going to be a higher incoming investment level. You're going to need to have a high quality camera. You're going to need to have a team that can handle that kind of post-production. So the cost of producing video versus the cost of producing audio is different. The audio nerd in me has to highlight the fact that video tends to deprioritize audio quality, sound quality. It tends to deprioritize the importance of this, of what it's going to sound like in your car, what it's going to sound like in your headphones on your walk. And that's the last piece of the cons for me, honestly, is with video, I need to get you to sit down and watch me. Now, yes, you can absolutely throw a YouTube video up while you're cooking in the kitchen or, while you're folding laundry or while you're working or whatever, walking on the treadmill. But I know I go on a lot of dog walks. I know I go on a lot of gym visits. I know I do a lot of kid drop-offs. I know that you and I hang out in a lot of environments where video is not conducive to easy consumption. And if your audience is happily and eagerly consuming your content in an environment where video is not going to be an option, removing an audio-only option, and I'm not saying you're doing that, but removing the audio-only option is going to lose you listeners. But even where you're including video and the audio only, why are you going through all that production cost if that's not what they want to consume? There are absolutely podcast listeners, and it's going to depend on your demographic. It's going to depend on what you're talking about. But there are, I promise, still people who would much rather listen to a podcast than watch a YouTube video. I know you're getting messaging that says that's not true. But you absolutely still see people who, and I talk to people all the time and I say, hey, what are you watching? How are you consuming content? And almost universally, they want audio only. And so look at your audience, ask your audience, know who you want your clients to be and who you're talking to. Because I don't want you to take on the cost and efforts of something that's just not going to be valuable for them. On the flip side, there are pros and cons to audio only as well. And a lot of them just reflect the opposite of what we just talked about, right? So the pros for audio only, you can get away with some pretty simple production. Your initial investment is a lot smaller. Your ability to hop in and just record changes, especially if you're somebody who does not want to be on video looking like I currently look, which is my hair's up in a ponytail. I'm wearing my comfiest of overalls from the Known Supply. I love these overalls. And I'm chilling in my office. I have not a stitch of makeup on. I am unfit for public consumption visually, but I sound great, don't I? Right? On the flip side, if I was shooting video, I would want to be, I'm not saying have to be or need to be, I would feel most comfortable. I would want to be looking a little different. I'd want my hair probably down, certainly actually styled. I would want and need some makeup to manage the fact that I would need to have lights on right now. I would need to have set up my camera and those lights. I would have, honestly, the outfit is really cute. We might have still gone with the outfit, but it would take more prep. Whereas I was able to, this is way more information than you need, squeeze this episode in last thing today before I wrap up my day, before my life shifts from work mode to mom mode. I was able to get this done. Video would not have allowed me to do that. So not only are the post-production needs simpler, but the actual recording and initial production needs are smaller. The cost of entry is lower. And the connection, being in your earbuds as you're running through your neighborhood, being in the car with you as you head to appointments, there's an intimacy there. And for me, that's hugely valuable. It is a big part of why I love this medium. And especially as you start to get into higher production videos, you just don't have that same closeness. It doesn't have the feeling of me sending you a voice message. This doesn't have the same feel of me sending you a really long Voxer, right? Whereas this does. And so that pro for me of connection is so, so big. But on the flip side, there are cons, right? I have to do things like audiograms instead of, traditional video reels. Content like that can succeed to varying degrees when it comes to Instagram reels and YouTube shorts and TikToks. A face on video tends to do better in reels and TikToks and shorts. It just does. And so in doing audio only, I sacrifice that element. This show is absolutely on YouTube, but it doesn't do as well as it would do if it was set up video first. It doesn't. I get a few watches here and there. It's absolutely the smallest part of my listenership, and that includes, Pandora. It gets more listeners, I think, than YouTube does. But that's because this show's not built to be consumed there. And so, yes, there's an option on YouTube, but because it's not built for that platform natively, it's simply not going to do as well. It's simply not going to be as impactful. And so I don't have that element. I don't have that connection point of you seeing me. I sacrifice that for the connection point of you hearing me in places where you wouldn't have the capacity to watch me. All right? There are pros and cons to both. You have to choose what's right for you right now. If you want to look at a video option, if you want to look at adding a video option, I highly recommend you go back to the experimentation stage. I talk a lot on this podcast about, that 20 episode experiment. We did a whole show on it, and I'll link it in the show notes. Give it 20 episodes and see if you even like podcasting. Give it 10 videos and see if you like doing video. Do a podcast series where you also do a video element. And if when you're done with that experiment, you're like, this is great. I love doing video. This is completely repeatable. This is absolutely something I can show up for consistently. Great. Integrate it into the podcast. And if not, you've got a great asset. You've got that set of videos that you can be repurposing, that you can be putting in email sequences, that you can be driving traffic to. All of those same things are true. Experiment with it. Test it. The biggest takeaway I want you to have is that there's not one right way here. There's not one right choice. And on the flip side, there's not a wrong choice. You get to decide what's right for you and your business right now. This has been a really common conversation that we've been having in our podcast strategy intensives. I have a couple more spots left for this year. We will do our last 3 in November and December. If you want to see what's available still, head on over to uncommonlymore.com/intensive and look there. You'll notice now that we've got 2 options. There is a new podcaster option and an existing podcaster option. The new podcast option is really built for us to create your experiment. The existing podcast option includes an audit of your existing podcast and us building out that 12-week content plan. So choose the one that's right for you and get yours booked in. I will see it in there, uncommonlymore.com/intensive to get all the details. Oh, and if you have questions and you're not sure which is right for you, or if that's the right path for you, book a call with me. We can chat, figure out what's right for you, figure out when is right for you. I'm happy to help guide that decision. All right? I will see you right back here next week. Thanks so much for listening to the show. Remember that content consumption does not make changes. So commit to doing something from today's episode. Maybe it's taking action on what we talked about. Maybe it's reaching out to me and learning more about podcast strategy intensives, or what podcast production looks like with our team. All of that is over at uncommonlymore.com. And if you haven't yet signed up for the podcast newsroom, I want to remind you that is a great next step. If you're not really sure what comes next, hang out over there. Get those exclusive private episodes. That's over at podcastnewsroom.com. And the last favor I will ask, because social proof is endlessly important for sure, is to leave a rating or review for the show. If you go to ratethispodcast.com/more, that's the easiest way to do it. But I would love to hear what you thought of the show, what you think of the show, and if the show has been helpful for you. I can't wait to chat with you. So this is just the start of the conversation. Reach out so we can keep it going. Talk soon.